How should you pitch your creative brand to your dream brand partner? In this video, we're gonna look at how MrBeast pitched his brand to General Motors and learn a few things along the way. Without further ado, let's just jump straight into it and talk a little bit about the background. You'll see some of these watermarks and it's like, what the hell is this? So this document was part of the proceeding that MrBeast company and the virtual dining concepts are going through. If you're not familiar, to quickly catch you up on the drama, the virtual dining concepts are the ones who helped MrBeast launch Beast Burger. You haven't heard about Beast Burger in like a year and a half. And this is because of this, because it was successful at launch, but then really start crumbling down. And currently both parties on a kind of like, fun litigation. And as part of that litigation, Virtual Dining Concepts attached this deck kind of like to show some references, I think, to their brand. Not relevant to our discussion, but just wanted to explain why you see some of these watermarks from the actual judicial proceeding. Now, from the perspective of the actual deck itself, the beginning is kind of like pretty standard, right? You want to do something to get the attention of your audience. In this case, your audience is, for example, the group of executives at General Motors. And so what Jimmy is really doing is setting the stage of how the entire conversation will go and why MrBeast is such a highly visible talent that they can potentially partner with. Similar kind of like goes to this second slide as well. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, speaking of Beast Burger, but essentially just demonstrates his impact and his influence. They're really setting the stage, right? When it comes to these kind of like conversations, when you're about to talk to a potential, individual who might invest with you or invest into your brand by creating that kind of like brand partnership, they need to be hooked, kind of like similar to what you do with your videos. When you create that initial hook in the first few seconds, this is what you do with these presentations. You create an initial hook of here is why you should be paying attention to the rest of the content that I'm about to present. And this is kind of like, again, continues through the first few slides. Nothing crazy interesting for each one of you. It's going to be a little bit different depending on how many things you can call out. But here you can see it's more kind of like a general numbers and things that you can kind of like tie to some of these major brands like Forbes or Rolling Stones. Because another consideration you need to make is almost like the age and the experience of the individuals who you are presenting to. In this case, it's General Motors. You can safely assume that those folks are not necessarily every day on social media. Some of them might be, but in the executive boardroom of General Motors, a lot of those folks can be quote unquote like more old school. So you want to tie your presence with the brands that they will recognize. So in this case, Jimmy's team is like tying it pretty well to, again, Rolling Stones, Forbes, very likely the magazines that team actually have read before. This is where it gets a little bit more interesting, right? Because a lot of these folks are very data driven, or hopefully they are. And for them, it is important to see a lot of these numbers. We don't have to break down every single one of them. Just the understanding is that they want to show the scale of the audience that they're addressing. And by the way, you'll see some of this like weird formatting. Some people actually I saw who like saw this deck were criticizing it. I think, yeah, formatting can be better, but you also see some issues with formatting because I think it was done in like Google Slides and then exported to the PowerPoint. And when you do that, formatting gets skewed all over the place. So I think it's really more about export of the file rather than this is how they actually went and presented. I highly doubt that this is what they did. But one of those interesting touches here, all the numbers aside, is, a little bit of a personal touch, adding the General Motors logo and wearing the t-shirt to kind of like demonstrates like, hey, we know exactly that we're presenting to you. And we kind of like made an effort to go into the, gray room and actually do a quick photo session and take some photos of Jimmy to show that we're really paying attention to this presentation, right? A little bit of a personal touch. Again, in your case, it can be, I don't know, you bringing some snacks that are actually from this brand or showing you, I don't know, consuming it in the pitch presentation. You can get a little bit creative with actually showing, hey, I'm actually on an ongoing basis using your product, right? In this case, if not next to the car, Jimmy at least showing that he's rocking their logo. This is where we kind of like continue now talking and tying back kind of like to that social validation, right? From this slide, Jimmy is really kind of like, again, coming back and talking about some of the numbers. And by the way, worth mentioning, you're going to see this number and be like, hey, that's a little bit further away because as of recording today, Jimmy just hit 400 million subscribers, right? It's like, we're a little bit light. but because this deck is about a year old, year and a half, so there's been tremendous growth, obviously, for MrBeast brand. And again, a lot of like tying back to we're present, we're trending, we're very popular around the world, we're creator of the year, we're fastest TikTok brand. And by the way, excuse me, we're also partnering with all these, brands that you may or may not recognize. Again, it adds a little bit of that social validation when it comes to conversations, especially when you're presenting to a potential audience that are not like your direct fans, and in this case, like folks in the boardroom of that particular business that you're trying to partner with. They might be aware of you, but then don't necessarily know you. So whatever kind of like social validation you can bring to the table that ties back to that audience in the room will help you, solidify and make that pitch land. And this is where we start seeing very interesting set of kind of like slides that I'm actually happy that they've presented, because it's a good use case for me to show you why it matters. So let's reset a little bit. They're presenting to General Motors. General Motors is one of those companies that produces a lot of cars. They're not necessarily, at the forefront, so to speak, of the industry right now. So they're obviously going to be doing some soul searching. And some of that soul searching comes back to EVs, like electrical vehicles, hybrid vehicles, things of that nature, to kind of like go and compete and show that they are on the edge of this industry. One of the important factors is the demographics, right? And the interesting stat that I like, what Jimmy's team showed here, is that they essentially starting to think, hey, who would we be compared to if we tried to pitch this brand partnership to General Motors and we're going to ask them for the X amount of money? That money is going to come out of somewhere, right? And with this, they're kind of like showing to say, hey, average, median, I guess in this case, median age for the audiences of these major networks is about 40, right? And so you will see that we kind of like discussed this a little bit, when I spoke about Emma Chamberlain's presentation. Sometimes you place kind of like a cookie crumbs through the deck and you start some narratives and you kind of like close the loop later down the line. Again, if you're producing the videos, you know about this methodology of like, opening and closing loops through a video. They do very similar things. They open and close loops through the presentation. And in this case, you will see that them showing an age of the audience of those channels essentially opens the loop that they're going to close in a couple of slides. But that's why you see them starting to talk about demographics of other channels and also starting to bring GM into focus, or specifically what it looks like their latest models of cars. From Jimmy's perspective, he's starting to draw parallels in comparison to here's who we're competing with. I don't know what this slide was redacted, so don't ask me why it's all gray, but the idea is that, again, right, you see they start tying back the reach that MrBeast has and the potential to showcase EVs on a global scale. This is now we walk into this world of saying the pitch itself, which is I think the genius of it, is not about, hey, through this partnership, we're going to go and help you sell hundreds and hundreds of thousands incremental cars. The pitch is very different, which I found it very interesting. They're really focused on the next 100 million customers who are watching MrBeast channel right now. Again, this is part of the cookie crumb trail that we're going to see in a slide or two. But as you can see is that they start talking about the teens and they really start talking about the influence on the younger demographics that right now are just developing the awareness of the brand, but not necessarily have an income to go and buy one of those cars. So Jimmy's team is taking a very interesting angle of saying, we're not going to try to pitch them this as a way to sell more cars. We're going to help them pitch this as a way to establish themselves and create this brand recognition that's going to pay back in years to come. Right. And this is where they again bring back Fortune 500 companies that are recognizing MrBeast as a brand, creating some kind of like, social buy-in. Again, talking about the fact that there's some potential interesting opportunities to do brand integration and they're very professional from that perspective. And then obviously showing like, hey, coming back to all those stats that you saw earlier, right? Speaking of open loops, they showed how much MrBeast impacts and how big of an audience he has across these channels. And by the way, here's we can see kind of like how frequently these teenagers, right, using those apps. And what I'm referring back to, if you go back to this slide, right, and I'm showing kind of like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, this is where they're closing the loop and saying, and this is why it matters. We have such a huge presence over there, and this is why it matters, because these folks constantly using these platforms. And by the way, these are the folks who potentially become your next 100 million of customers. Very nice and interesting loop that they're creating through the presentation. And this is kind of like how they now start tying it back to GM and why it matters for them. Again, ignore some of the bad formatting because I think it's just a matter of export. And again, it's a court proceeding document, not like they were trying to make it really look nice and snazzy when they were exporting it. But the idea, if you cannot hear it, is that they're talking about electrification and the fact that the market is moving towards electric cars. And how General Motors right now are not at the forefront with really Tesla, right? I think it's Model Y and Model X or Model S. It's hard to read from here. And they're kind of like top of the pack right now. And the idea is that they're tying back and they're saying, this is why it matters to you. GM, you guys really care or should be thinking and considering heavily moving into the electric vehicle world. And by the way, here's some of the leaders kind of like as a reminder to tie out the narrative so that they can then present on why MrBeast is a great brand for them to partner with, right? So identifying not only demographics, but also the problems that the brand is facing and how the brand like MrBeast brand can go and help them solve that problem. And this is where it's interesting how narratively now we start tying it back and saying, let us help you, right? Take the front seat. Let us help you catch and take advantage of these projections. Again, the interesting part is worth mentioning. The market is cooling off right now. So a year and a half since that deck was created, the market is actually cooling off. Some of these companies are stepping back and actually, like either selling their EV plants or selling their battery plants. So they're like slowing down the investments. Part of it is influence from the Trump administration. Part of it just in general, people are not yet ready to spend as much because those cars are more expensive. But that aside, right? Like, so if you look at it, if you're aware and you roll your eyes a little bit at these projections, just know that they were, again, a year and a half old. But this is why kind of like it's interesting. Again, they're showing this potential and they're tying their narrative back to the potential that they can help GM in this case to realize. And this is where we land kind of like to that closed loop of the cookie crumbs of why they're mentioning all this social media, why they're mentioning all these teenagers, and why they would make it about the future customers versus current customers. Because if you look at the breakdown of the current kind of like population of MrBeast audience, right? What is it like? More than almost 60% of them are younger than 24. So likely, I would say 24, 25, when you probably have enough of a spare income to buy a next car, especially if it's EV, you're probably getting close to 30. So really, the majority of the population right now from MrBeast audience are much younger than what they've been fit for to be the current customer and drive the sales of the cars right now. And this is a good strategy. It's understanding your quote unquote weaknesses as a brand, as a creator brand, and leveraging them to kind of like spin them, judo throw them, move, so to speak, reverse it into your strength. If they would come in cold and start presenting to those GM executives and saying like, hey, MrBeast, we have these hundreds of millions of subscribers, we have all these viewers, you should partner with us. A smart person in that boardroom, and those boardrooms are full of smart people, would say, okay, but who is your audience? Give me your demographics. Oh, 60% of them are younger than 24. They immediately glaze across their eyes. They tune off. They're like, yeah, but this is not our core demographic for our product. So even though you have a billion of them, if you have a billion of them, we still don't care because those are not the people who are buying our cars, right? So, and that's it. Close shot, case done, pitch failed. Instead, knowing that and knowing that influence, they're not coming into the room and saying, we're going to help you sell the cars today. They're saying, hey, listen up. All this legacy media, average age there is above 40, nearing 50 and 60 years old. Those people are done, right? They bought their car, maybe they'll buy another car, and they're pretty much off of your market. Current market, we cannot necessarily help you, so they don't even mention this, or maybe they mention in some redacted slides. But then the real focus is, we have this demo that loves us, that watches our content constantly, that's across all these platforms. And on all these platforms, we have massive presence. They will be your future customer. So if you want to take advantage of that growing trend in the marketplace and this growing demand for the electrical vehicles and hybrid vehicles, guess what? Partner with us, work with us for the next few years. You will be in front of that audience every single day. In a nutshell, this is the pitch. This is what they're trying to say to GM in all of these slides. And I really love kind of like how it all ties together narratively. And again, when it comes to presenting, we'll talk a little bit about in conclusion as well, but when you start thinking about for yourself, how do I go about it? How do I present to my like dream sponsor? You really need to find those tie-ins, right? Like you need to find what do you bring to the table and what are your strengths and weaknesses? What are some of the gaps and the needs that your dream partner has? And how can you intertwine them in a way that it's not a conversation about right now, next 2 weeks, next month? How is it a conversation about next few years of your partnership together? And this is what Jimmy's team is trying to do. They're not trying to create a single one of brand partnership. This entire presentation is about let's work together for the next few years to help you solve for this problem of the aging demographic across all the media channels and your need to take advantage of this trend in the market when it comes to electrical vehicles. And this is kind of like how we grow from a slide like this to start talking about, okay, and this is where Jimmy is also highly like influential and engaged when it comes to sustainability missions, right? Electricity, electrical vehicles, hybrid vehicles, frequently tied back to the goals of like zero emission, offsetting the carbon monoxide footprint, right? Like kind of like improving the environment, improving the climate. And by the way, we're there as well. Jimmy has already had Team Seas, Team Trees. We have Beast Philanthropy that actively engages in that environment. So again, you're not only buying that social proof, but you're also saying, besides the demographics, besides our influence on that audience, we're actually also trying to make a similarly positive effect so our brands are more aligned. And kudos from the t-shirt switching to the hoodie with the brand as well. And this is where kind of like they start tying it all together with this odd, what I only think is like 3D created image of Jimmy to say, hey, we can partner you to work through the audience of Gen Zs and Gen Alphas and work with us or your competition will. Now, I have conflicting thoughts about putting that kind of thing up front in your presentation, right? Like, or your competition. Like, basically, when they say this, they're kind of like suggesting, hey, there might be other brands who will partner with us, creating some urgency, come talk to us as well. I usually think this is the kind of thing that you leave kind of like your manager, like operations guy like myself to go in there and say. If especially Jamie was the one presenting this, I wouldn't necessarily make him present this point, just mostly because when you come in as a creator, you want to drive a very positive response, positive reinforcement, right? Like engaging with that audience so they feel excited of working with you. You can kind of like thread that needle and make a statement like, hey, your competition will take advantage of this if you want. I'm just of two thoughts because you want to drive a distinction between who delivers a very positive kind of like outlook and who's being a little bit of that like stick in the mud, a little bit of that person in the room who will push back and challenge them a little bit. And this is where your agent, your manager, your business partner, let them do those talking points because they'll be already aggravating them a little bit, negotiating the terms of the deal, pushing back on some like, language in the contract, pushing back on the fee, negotiating the fee. That's their job. And so they should be the one, I think, making that statement through the negotiation process of the fee itself of saying like, hey, you don't want to pay us the amount that we're asking you? Okay, sure, but there's 3 other companies of your size that can potentially pay us this much. So do you want to partner with us or do you want us to go pitch them, right? Like, this is a much better point coming back again from the business partner, from operating team, from management team. Small tidbit, small kind of like, nitpicky thing about this specific statement. But again, the idea is of showing kind of like, hey, here's Jamie next to these cars. And this is kind of like creates that visual representation of we can partner together and this is what you'll potentially see. And they kind of like look back a little bit, which narratively is interesting. I don't know if that's how I would do it. You kind of like starting to conclude and close those loops about the relationship, the partnership with the team, your influence, but they kind of like back to the influence. So maybe narratively they were trying to reinforce, but also it could have been, again, we don't have the entire deck. It's all like pieces of slides that I had put together from various different sources that I was able to find. So there could have been some other more kind of like narratively tied in slides, but to me it was a little bit jarring that they're coming back to talking about the influence, which again, Nothing bad about it, because they can continue to talk about, here's all the great things that we can do for you as a potential kind of like, business partner from the perspective of our influence on other audiences. And here's, by the way, our, one of the largest videos that we've released, which was, by the looks of it, the first video for Squid Games and the potential influence and potential impact. They talk a little bit about, again, the growth, which makes me think these were more kind of like appendix slides rather than main slides, but I still wanted to quickly flash them. They talk a little bit about the history, the growth, the momentum, all the different brands that they have access to, philanthropical engagements that they already spoke about, right, from the Team 3s, Team Cs over here, but also the fact that they have a CPG product and how that is growing, and the fact that they have a lot of interesting, exciting milestones that they've achieved. Again, all creating tie-ins to the social proof that they've been generating throughout this presentation. Talking again a little bit of a timeline, which this deck was presented, I think, sometime mid-2023. So they're talking back at the past year. Here's all the exciting things we've done. Again, shows the ability to drive the influence, shows the ability to be able to deliver in a very busy environment, and how many different things are happening. That's another kind of like important factor, because when you think and you try to pitch long-term partnership, one of the questions that brand partner will have, okay, but how many potential engagements, how many potential opportunities there will be for my brand to be in front of your audience? And some of these slides kind of like also point out and say, hey, Jimmy's constantly in front of his audience. There's constantly new things that happening that are kind of like piping up the excitement about the brand. And if you're heavily, as a General Motors, associated with Jimmy's brand, every time some of those things happen, there will be pops in social media, pops in the news articles, pops in it comes to content viewership. And if your brand is part of that viewership, you will take advantage of each one of these pops. So you're not only going to get the payment for whatever, the return on your investment from a couple of initial videos that we're going to partner together. Pops. And so that kind of like, again, then ties back a little bit, talking about EV landscape, electric vehicles landscape, and talking about this potential trend and how it's going up, MrBeast's influence on Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and again, kind of coming back to the fact that there's potential tie-ins to some of the things that the competitors are doing, and competitors can take advantage of this partnership if you want. This was kind of like an interesting wrap-up couple of slides where they were talking about, hey, here's the leader. Again, a reminder, I don't think it's an important piece of information you present directly in the deck, and I'll say about it in a second. That's why, again, I feel like it's more of a appendix slide, but they're basically tying it in and saying, hey, Tesla right now is leading the market, but MrBeast kind of like runs the most popular show in the world, and we have this potential engagement opportunity with millions and millions of people, billions of impressions, and you will become an official vehicle partner. And instead of Jimmy constantly driving his Model X, he might be driving one of the, GM cars in his videos. The reason why I don't find necessarily this kind of information like uber important in the presentation, like that second half was talking about potential opportunity and kind of like reminding them like, hey, Jimmy's right now driving Tesla. Tesla's a leader in the market. Let's partner. We're going to make sure Jimmy's driving your cars in his videos. Besides that, commenting on the market itself, you need to be really prepared, right? Because if your assumption is you want to drive the engagement from this audience knows their industry pretty well. If they don't, there are other concerns about who you're trying to partner, but the important factor is that they will very likely, they're pretty much guaranteed to know that industry way better than you do, unless you're coming from that industry as well. So it just exposes you a little bit in a sense of like, it's a good intention, but you might say something very basic or something incorrect, and that will actually ding their impression of you during the presentation. So again, not a huge risk factor, but a little bit of a necessary risk in my opinion. Like, you don't need to tell them about the market. Like, show them a couple of charts about the EV. They already know it. Very likely they're talking about those boardrooms constantly about those problems, right? Unless, again, it's a newly founded problem or something new that they're still trying to explore. Can be that you're an AI expert, you're talking to some company that has exposure to AI technology in the sense that AI can take over their industry and they're not sure what to do, or at least you suspect they're not sure what to do. You showing some of that expertise because you're coming from that industry is actually a big positive. But again, if you're in a more established industry with well-established experts who will be there in the room with you and you're not one of those experts, mention a couple of things, focus on your strengths, Don't overstretch yourself by trying to tell them about the industry that they've been spending, I don't know, decades in. So that's just, again, another small nitpicky thing. Now, from the perspective of how do you tie it all together and what is the main takeaway for you, right? I'll kind of like quickly read them out and then we'll talk through. So again, play to your strengths, cater message to them, and do your homework. Those are kind of like the three things I want to focus on from the takeaway perspective, and primarily because when it comes to thinking about how you position yourself in front of the brand, it's very similar to any other presentation that you make. Say you're trying to pitch yourself to your potential viewer, to prospective viewer, you're trying to pitch yourself to a potential business partner, right? It's always about playing to your strength. And playing to your strength requires you understanding your weaknesses. So that's an important work you need to do. An important preparation step that I think you should do before you walk into that kind of a discussion, and this is where AI can be an amazing partner. Think about the objections, think about the questions that will be asked, and lead with understanding of what your weaknesses are. One of the good methodology for the first two is really just put it in ChatGPT, put it in Google Gemini, and just say, hey, I'm presenting to this audience. Give me 50 potential questions or 50 potential objections that they're going to make to the presentation that I'm going to make about XYZ, right? And just see, some of them might be redundant or very basic, but prepare and think about those questions, think about those objections, because if you're prepared to handle the objections, the flow of the conversation will be much better and you will feel more confident, because sometimes when those objections come at you and you're not prepared, you'll be like a deer in the headlight. And it's not a good look in front of some of those folks. If you thought about it, you prepared, you thought about the script, and you have kind of like on the side somewhere rehearsed answers to all those like main critical questions, you're going to be in great shape. For the third one, when it comes to thinking about like, hey, how can this all fall apart? There's a good methodology in the framework where ask yourself, how can this presentation go wrong, right? And it can be technical difficulties. It can be someone from the room is not present, can be someone from your room is not present, something else is happening. Literally create that list of all the different things that can go wrong and be prepared. Technology is not working, have printouts of the deck ready somewhere in your backpack in case you can just quickly hand over slides to them. One of the individuals who you will be presenting with is not going to be there, be prepared to present all on your own, right? Like things of that nature. Just ensure you plan not from the perspective of success, but plan from the perspective of failure and see where things can go wrong. And this is kind of like will be one of the important factors that will help you succeed in that brand pitch. From the perspective of catering message to them, you saw how through the presentation, Jimmy's team was very specific about, hey, here's all the things that are happening in your industry. Here's how we can potentially influence them. Here's the aging demographic. Here's the new demographic, right? Like they made sure that they've identified the problems and things that the company that they're presenting will likely care about, and they tied their strengths to them. So once you're in a position of understanding your strengths and your weaknesses, you can now start drawing those parallels and tie-ins with the problem that you're helping them solve. Obvious point there, make sure that's an actual problem that they're trying to solve. Read the news articles, read the interviews, listen to the interviews, hear and potentially find as much as you can about the things that they're trying to solve for. And again, if especially you're pitching yourself to a public company, there are plenty of disclaimers and disclosures they have to make about those things. Their quarterly and annual guidance will include like, hey, we're expecting headwinds in this particular areas. Do your research, do your homework. And this is where that third point come in. Ensure you understand the industry if you're not an expert in it. You ensure you understand the company, their competitors, what's happening, the latest headwinds. Honestly, this is like preparing for the major exam, right? Especially if you're younger and that's kind of like more relevant to you. But if you're a little bit older, it's like preparing for a potential, like, big summary overview of your business, right? You need to know how to tie it all together narratively between the things that they care about and things that you can accomplish, and be prepared to handle any objections and questions when it comes to the weaknesses that you potentially have. Maybe mismatch in demographic, maybe small size of demographic, maybe your lack of experience in the industry, whatever they may be the first to know how to address it. Never leave an open window for someone to come in and kind of like, take advantage of the presentation, potentially negotiate you down just because of the fact that they can say, yeah, but he's not that big of an expert, I'm not going to pay him the top dollar, right? As an example. So again, really understand what your strengths and weaknesses are. Think through all those questions that you might be asking, objections you might hear in that boardroom. Do your freaking research. People in the room, the company, the industry, competitors, where the headwinds are, where the winds kind of like, are flowing, where this entire industry is going. Be prepared. You cannot half-ass this kind of a discussion. You really need to make sure you're buttoned up. And yes, it's going to take days, potentially weeks of preparation, but guess what? You're presenting to your dream partner, dream sponsor. If you nail this one down, it potentially can give you multi-year partnership, and hopefully at the size where maybe we'll let you go full-time as a creator. Maybe we'll enable you to go and invest in more things and do more dream projects that you haven't had chance to accomplish because you didn't have that kind of a stable funding. This matters. This can be groundbreaking and game-changing for you as a business, so take it seriously. I hope this was useful. Let me know in the comment section below if you have any other questions about how you would want to approach it, or maybe have some doubts or questions about how I suggested you should approach it. Reach out. Always happy to chat about those things. I've been through those presentations quite a few times, so always happy to share my experience. And otherwise, I'll see you next Saturday. Peace.